Good evening, community. As with every episode, I'm very pleased that you're here again, ready and willing to listen to stories that will challenge your imagination and what you believe is possible. Additionally, today we have for you one of those polarizing episodes, talking about a topic that can be terrifying for many people, and for others, will be just stories born from fantasy and imagination. However, this episode, although it's about witches, is different. We're not just going to talk about witches as those figures from our legends that live in those stories. We'll also talk about those witches who are among us, those people who dedicate themselves to doing work, who charge for these services, which can sometimes be extremely macabre. As if that weren't enough, we also have one who shares her experience with us today. A witch. So believe me, we have a great episode for you tonight that I know you're going to enjoy. Turn off the light and let yourself be carried away, because you're already listening to Tales of the Night. Hello, community. Thank you for sharing your stories and making us see that no matter what happens to us, we're never really alone. For letting us know that there's always someone who has experienced something similar and who can sometimes help us. I live in a neighborhood where there are several 5-story housing units, a set of modest apartment towers, which ends right at a ravine that leads to a very busy city road, a quite high ravine. I live in the last building, next to that ravine that with each rain erodes more, until in many parts the path behind the fence, where the apartments end, has disappeared. Even when it was less than half a meter wide, it gave you the opportunity to walk there, while holding onto the fence. But now it has almost disappeared. That's good on one hand and bad on the other. Good because there were no longer thieves coming through there, jumping over our patios and stealing things we left outside. But bad because we could no longer escape. I mean, the young people in the area. We could no longer return home late, walking along that small path. If I've been so descriptive about this place, it's because it will be important for the story. You see, at my mom's work she had some people under her charge as she was the manager of a branch, a clothing store in a shopping mall in my city. At some point, a girl came to work there, but she had a big problem getting along with others. She was a bad coworker, but my mom tried to integrate her. Until on one occasion, unfortunately, she caught her stealing money from the cash register. She had to report her and fire her, but the girl threatened her. She said she would regret it, that she'd better withdraw her accusation. My mom didn't accept. She would have done it if she had asked in a different way. I know her, but not if they tried to intimidate her, to threaten her. The girl was fired but swore to take revenge, and my mom was so angry that she vomited bile all night. But when I helped her, when she seemed to be choking in the bathroom, I noticed that her vomit was of a very intense green color, as if she had drunk paint. That vomiting began to repeat every night at a certain time, when my mom locked herself in the bathroom, until we heard her crying in pain. At that moment, even without believing in witchcraft and that type of work that many must already be imagining, we knew that what that girl said had something to do with it, that those bad wishes could be affecting my mom, or maybe even the feeling of guilt for having fired that young woman. My mom got so bad that she asked for the pending vacation she had to recover, and her boss told her to rest for 1 more week, that the store would pay for it so she wouldn't have to worry about anything, so she could recover completely. But that's when, instead of doing so, instead of recovering, she got worse. My mom began to see things. She told us that she saw a man who appeared in her room at night. A fleshless man who danced in her room. She told us how he did it, with his arms open upwards, from side to side. My sister and I asked her to let us sleep with her, but she said no, that she didn't want what she was suffering to affect us, that it might infect us. It became such an anguishing sensation for us that we started to go out at night. It was horrible, it drained us. It made us feel weak, but only at night. Because during the day the house was almost a normal house. At night it was different. We felt there was something in the house. Something bad. Something terrible. One day my sister would go out and I would stay to take care of my mother. The next day I would go out. That was our way of surviving it. One of those nights I went to a friend's house. His mom worked at night, so I would go play video games with him until very late in the morning. Suddenly, I received a call from my sister. She told me that one of my uncles had arrived at home with a priest to see my mom, that they asked about me, and she told them I was asleep. She told me they were in my mom's room, that my uncle was about to go out for something at the pharmacy, and that I should return as soon as possible. But so that I wouldn't be surprised in the parking lot at the entrance, she told me to arrive from behind, through the ravine. I told her I couldn't, that there was no more space to walk there, but she hung up. I then told my friend what my sister had just told me, and he said that if I tried, I could. Just very carefully. But yes, that he had passed through the back, that he would go with me. We weren't far, just a few blocks from the housing unit, so we ran for a few minutes until we reached that ravine. We walked alongside the fence, but after just a few meters it became impossible. We had to keep walking sideways, pressed against the fence, trying to hold on to it, afraid that the earth would crumble under my feet. We advanced like this until we were only 40 meters away from reaching the height of my house, but there we could no longer advance. The path ended. A couple of meters of hole had been made in the ravine, and for some engineering reason or whatever, that fence had not collapsed. There were 2 meters of fence hanging, but right above that part, it had half a meter of cyclone wire mesh. Some areas of neighbors had organized to put those meshes when there were more robberies. It didn't prevent a thief from jumping, but it made it very difficult to escape with the loot. At that moment, I tried to climb the fence and advance in a squatting position. Hanging from the mesh was the only option. "No way, dude, come on, like Mario Bros," my friend told me, and I started laughing a little while he helped me up to hang. That's as far as he would accompany me. He was waiting for me to manage to cross without falling to leave, but just when I was reaching the other side of the hole, he shouted at me. He shouted at me not to advance. He told me there was something on the other side. When I turned to where he was pointing, I saw something right in front of the height of my building. A figure in black. It looked like a woman. A woman dancing. Dancing exactly as my mom said. That fleshless man who appeared in her room danced. I was about to fall, to let go. I told my friend I couldn't go back, that I was going to fall, that I had to keep moving forward. Then he took a rock or a bottle that was lying there. I don't remember well, but I do remember that he threw it very hard towards that dancing figure. And it hit, and that thing turned towards us. And then instead of running pressed against the fence, it lunged towards the ravine, but it didn't fall. It was going down that almost vertical ravine as if it were a spider. Out of fear, my friend ran off in the opposite direction. I, as best I could, jumped inside the housing unit, even though I hadn't reached my building yet and had to run to the parking lot, and even if I ran into my uncle. I entered my house running, but my uncle was still in my mom's room. Also, his priest friend and another woman who my sister told me had arrived shortly after. They came out at dawn. No one realized that I wasn't there. So I couldn't say what I had seen, or they would have scolded me, or they would have known that I wasn't in my house that night. The priest was the first to leave, but my uncle and the lady stayed until the afternoon to take care of my mom. I heard them talk. I heard how the lady said that they had sent a dead person to my mom, but that she couldn't get it out. That it was something more complicated than what she regularly dealt with. Someone came to bring a bag with something that looked like salt and sprinkled it on doors and windows, on all the entrances to the house. At a moment when she wasn't looking, I took some and went to throw it on the back fence, where I had seen that woman, or whatever it was, dancing. It took my mom months, but over time she recovered completely. Eventually, we ended up moving from that apartment to a place nearby, but far from that ravine. It will always cause me a lot of intrigue to know what it was that I saw, but I know that here in the community, I will be able to find answers. I send you greetings and thank you for listening. Hello, Uriel. I'm glad to greet you and tell you that we listen to your stories while we're working. But when one of us stays alone, we turn them off, because although nothing has ever happened to us here, suggestion can be dangerous. I want to tell you my story, which isn't recent, but whenever I tell someone, they tell me I should share it here. I wouldn't want you to say my name, but if you want, you can talk openly about the places where it happened. I attach photos of where it occurred in case you decide to use them. This happened 26 years ago. I was 14 and I'm currently 40. It's worth mentioning that it was the time when I behaved worst at home. My mom worked all day and left me with my grandma. I would go out on my bike without permission and ride around the neighborhoods, which, although close to my house, weren't so close as to be riding alone, less at night and on the bike. Of course, they were different times, but still I knew I shouldn't go out. I live in a municipality very close to the capital of San Luis Potosí. It's called Soledad de Graciano Sanchez, in that municipality in a neighborhood called Los Fresnos. And there was an abandoned high school there that is now the archive of the Autonomous University of San Luis Potosí. But before, it was high school number 1. When what I'm going to tell you happened to me, it was still the high school, but there were no longer classes there. We knew there was a person who took care of it, but we never saw them. We didn't know any stories either. Of course, people said it was haunted, but we had never proven it until that day. The high school was on a very long and straight street. Before, where that street ended, there was only dirt and there was no passage beyond. Later, a subdivision and a condominium were built, and they opened the passage. But at that time, people could go out without problems, since the street was closed. Everyone used the sidewalk of the high school to teach their children to ride bikes, to skate, or they simply went out to get some fresh air in the gardens. It had several with very large trees, so it was always full of people. I hung out with several neighborhood kids from the block. We played soccer, taking advantage of the fact that no cars passed, or we were simply sitting there talking, smoking a cigarette, which was the most forbidden thing we used to do. That day I'm going to talk about, particularly that day, was a bit strange from the beginning. I arrived at the gardens and there was no one, neither my friends nor other people who always came out to that place. It was almost 6 o'clock. I remember it was autumn because it started to get dark between 6:30 or 6:45. I found it very strange that no one had arrived. The atmosphere felt heavy and strange. In several stories you've narrated, I've heard this, that moments become like this when something bad is going to happen. I was sitting in the largest garden on the street in front of the high school, but not pressed against the wall, but on the street side, waiting for some of my friends to arrive. In the end, one arrived. At least one. We were talking about how strange it was to us that there were no people on the street, and several other trivial things. We heard someone hiss at us, twice. The sound came from our right side. We thought it was the others, who were already arriving, so I stood up to see, because one of the bars of the high school was blocking us. But there was no one. It was a very, very straight street to see if someone was coming, but there was no one. We continued talking, trying to ignore that fact. About 10 or 15 minutes later, again. Equally twice, but now the sound came from the left side, where there was a mound of dirt that blocked the street. Despite being far from the end of the street, that sound was heard too clearly. We found it very strange that we couldn't see people on that side either, someone who could be talking to us, but still, we didn't rule out that it was our friends who were trying to play a prank on us. 10 or 15 minutes later, we heard it again. Now the sound came from the street across, where the block was smaller. On the corner there was a store, and sometimes we were there too, so we thought that maybe it was our friends. But by that time, it had already darkened completely. We still saw ourselves alone in that place. We were really very puzzled, but trusting that it was them, joking as always. So we just kept talking. Until again the sound came from very, very close. So close that we heard it above us. And at that moment, we were petrified. We took a couple of seconds to turn, to look up, to turn to see who it was, what it was. On the tree branch, behind us was a person in a position, like a lizard. It was a woman. She was wearing white clothes and had tangled hair, but her eyes were fixed directly on us and in a position as if wanting to pounce on us. We let out a terrible scream and ran away. My friend, I don't know in which direction he went, but he ran away, and I grabbed my bicycle and pedaled as fast as I could, never looking back. I went so fast that I passed through a street where the city bus turns, and it had to brake to avoid hitting me. I was crying, shaking. My legs were shaking. I also felt a strange heat, like when you get scared, that even your ears feel hot, and my heart was racing. That's how I arrived at my house. My mom had already arrived, and I told her what had happened to me, because I couldn't stop crying. I never went back to that place. I didn't know what happened to my friends, because in those times, there were no cell phones, and I never thought to ask for their phone numbers. I knew where they lived, but for me, that part of the neighborhood was off limits. I never knew what it was. Was it a homeless person? Or what the hell was that? Many things were said about that place. The little sister of a friend had seen a woman similar to the one we saw. She had seen her, according to her, trying to throw herself off a bridge that was nearby, several nights. Other people said that the weeping woman appeared there. Well, at the back of the high school runs the Boulevard Rio Santiago, which was indeed a river. Anyway, they were just stories we told each other when we were there talking, but we could never prove them. To this day, I can't pass by there. I've passed 2 or 3 times because I've had to, but I always close my eyes or turn to the opposite side, because despite so many years having passed, I remember it as vividly as that day. It was also very important for me to tell you that at that time I behaved very, very badly, because after that event, I didn't go out again. I left the bicycle for a while, and I dedicated myself to being at home obeying my grandmother. Now yes, my behavior changed drastically. I don't know if what I saw was a witch. My mom thinks so. Also, among all the stories you've told, I know that witches hiss when they want to take you, so maybe it could have been one that I could have attracted with my bad behavior, don't you think? But that's my story, and I thank the community for their attention. Community, what did you think of today's stories? Tell me, do you have any experience similar to these? We'd love to know for a new compilation, no matter how short your story is. And of course, we also want to know if you believe in this type of situations or not, in this type of entities or creatures. Your answer is very valid. We want to know it, especially if the answer is no. We want to know what leads you to believe in other things, but not in witches, not in this type of energies. For now, we continue with more stories tonight. Hello, community. Before I begin my story, I want to congratulate you on how much your project has grown. I'm a big fan of yours. What I'm about to tell you happened to me when I was very young, when I was a child. So I honestly doubt that these kinds of encounters with witches are exclusively due to listening to these types of stories. Rather, I think it's something that has always lived among us. My name is Elena. I live in the south of Mexico City. I'm currently 22 years old, and in fact, I was never baptized. I don't know if that has anything to do with this. The story I'm about to tell you occurred in the east of the city, near the Constitucion de 1917 metro station. And yes, I know, it's an area well known for the witches of Cerro de la Estrella. I was extremely attached to my older sister. She took care of me since I was little, and was the first person I called Mom, since my parents worked all day every day, and she took care of me because she didn't like the idea of me being in daycare almost all week. Years later, she met a guy she moved in with near the Santa Cruz Mayahualco Sports Center. When I was 8 years old, my niece Sophia was born. I'll say it again, I was extremely attached to my sister, so to keep me from missing her too much, my parents and her in-laws agreed that I would spend weekends with her and her husband's family, which consisted of her in-laws and her 3 brothers-in-law who loved me very much. Everything was going wonderfully at that time. Every Friday after school, my dad would take me to my sister's house. I was almost the perfect child in my family. Everyone congratulated my parents and my brother for my good values, my grades, for not being a rude child, and for having excellent manners. As I said, my brother-in-law's family loved me a lot. Besides, my niece and I were the only girls among so many male cousins. Obviously, they spoiled us too much. They even invited me to spend vacations with them. They took me to family parties to eat, to amusement parks, etc. They wanted to keep me close because I would be a good influence on Sophia. I remember well that this happened right during summer vacation. My niece was barely approaching her first year, and my sister often found herself alone for long periods because they had changed my brother-in-law's work schedule, and he now had the night shift. My little niece had been having very bad dreams in recent days. Nightmares. She would wake up at night. Sometimes she would laugh alone while sleeping and things like that, as if someone was talking at night. It all started one night when my sister was sleeping alone in her bed with my niece in the crib next to her. We clearly heard what sounded like long fingernails tapping on the window at the head of the bed, which faced directly onto the street. When she heard the tapping, she instinctively thought it was my brother-in-law. However, when she sat on the edge of the bed and fully woke up, she saw that it was barely 4 in the morning. My brother-in-law didn't get off work until 7. My little niece started crying a lot, very badly. Again, as if something was hurting her too much. My sister felt very afraid, so she went to get her from her crib. She wrapped her up well in blankets. She let the dog into the room, and they both slept together in the bed. But it kept escalating. Until once around 7 or 8 at night. It wasn't that late. In fact, there were still people on the sidewalk outside selling food. My sister was attending to people in the grocery store she ran with my brother-in-law. It was a store literally attached to my sister's house. There was a very short hallway that connected this business to the living room. You had to cross this same room to get to the bedroom where they both slept, and where my niece's crib was also located. There were too many people in the store, so she opted to leave Sophia sleeping in the room. She put big blankets and pillows around her so that in case she rolled over, the baby wouldn't fall. There was a moment when the dog she had ran growling very angrily towards the living room. We clearly heard a bang on the wall, and then my niece screamed before starting to cry, horribly. My sister, of course, forgot about the customers. She ran to the room to find my niece lying on the floor with half of her body under the bed. The first thing my sister checked was that she didn't have any serious bumps on her head. And even though she didn't see anything, she took her to the emergency hospital, but her diagnosis indicated that she hadn't even suffered a bump. Meanwhile, I stayed with her mother-in-law and 2 of her brothers-in-law in the house. Out of curiosity, I went to look at the bed. There was absolutely no sign that she had rolled or fallen. There was no way. There was no mark on the bed that someone or something else had leaned on the blankets or pillows. Nothing. Also, the dog wouldn't stop sniffing around the house as if looking for something. When my sister returned from the hospital, I told her all this, that nothing was thrown on the bed, or untidy, that it was very strange. We checked again carefully, and indeed nothing. It was as if something had picked up the baby and left her on the floor. The next day, her mother-in-law told her that in that area of the city, there are many witches and gave her some advice to protect the baby. But my sister, with her terrible memory, forgot how to do it. And well, here comes my role in this story. When I stayed over during vacation so as not to feel alone, I slept in my sister's room. So my brother-in-law slept upstairs, in his parents' house, with his brothers. Downstairs, it was just the three of us. My niece, the baby, my sister, and me. One night, after watching a children's movie, we went to sleep as usual. But this situation occurred in the early morning, almost at 3 o'clock. I woke up with a lot of pain in my body, but I didn't wake up normally like any person. That is, I just opened my eyes as if I had never fallen asleep. I wouldn't know how to explain it exactly, but I know that out there someone has felt like this at some point, as if you had just lain down and immediately opened your eyes. I swear I felt too strange when I woke up. But I remember that I didn't even wake up lying down, but leaning against the wall with my back, almost sitting. I woke up with the feeling that something was watching me, and when I wanted to speak to wake up my sister who was next to me, my mouth hurt too much. I even felt a stab in my lower lip. My whole mouth felt too painful, hot, and when I touched it, it felt wet. I got even more scared and shook my sister, and she, very annoyed, woke up, got up to turn on the light, and I only saw terror on her face. She immediately ran towards the stairs to her mother-in-law's house on the second floor without saying anything to me. I just stood paralyzed. I looked at my chest and my pajamas were full of blood. I touched my mouth and it was bleeding too. I felt like crying a lot, but I didn't because it would wake the baby. Suddenly, I saw my brother-in-law and his whole family coming down running. He picked me up and took me to the living room. My brother-in-law, my sister, her in-laws, and her 3 brothers-in-law checked me. The house, the room, the bed, the baby, everything. There was no sign that I had hit myself with the nightstand next to the bed. There wasn't even blood among the blankets, the pillow, the carpet in the room. Nothing. Only I was covered in blood, and later I noticed bruises on my arms and legs. It really seemed like something had hit me quite hard. I felt disoriented. I was even shaking uncontrollably, and when I could, I cried. I was little, full of feelings I had never had before. I was in shock. They healed my lip. They gave me tea. They rubbed ointments on my bruises. I changed my pajamas. They even cleaned me with an egg, and everyone tried to calm me down, until sleep finally overcame me. The next day, very early, the lady, my sister's mother-in-law, sent her children for holy water to sprinkle around the house. They took me to my parents. My sister and her in-laws couldn't stop apologizing for feeling they hadn't taken good care of me. But no one really knew what had happened. Years later, my mom told me that in private my sister's mother-in-law talked to her. She told her that a witch had probably bitten me. The truth is I was little. I never checked my lip. I was scared to do it and it hurt. But when they checked me to clean the blood, they realized that what I had wasn't a bump, but a bite. But they hadn't told me anything because it could scare me even more. I was only 8 years old. If it was already something traumatic for me at that time, it could have made me even more suggestible. The lady committed to doing a cleansing in the house so that I would continue visiting them. They loved me too much and liked me to spend weekends and vacations with them. It still took about 3 more months for me to go back. My mom confessed to me that it took them a long time to completely clean that house. But when I went back, my sister told me that they never bothered my niece again. She had no problem sleeping at all, since that thing that happened to me. And after that night, I began to have, I don't know, a kind of gift for dreaming about recently deceased close people. Dreams that feel quite real. I can see shadows, hear cries, etc. All this without feeling any fear at all. A friend, for example, unfortunately took his own life when I was 16 years old, and I dreamed of him. I talked to him. He even gave me some messages to give to other members of our circle of friends. And yes, I was right about everything. He told me things that even happened before I met them. It's been 15 years now, and my family, my sister's family, and I still remember that night, but we also still wonder who or what did that. My sister's mother-in-law told me that witches and these beings only focus on pure souls, without malice, innocent, and to this day she says that I'm still one, that probably this thing that was bothering my niece found something to take from me and no longer needed her. But the reality is that I only know that something bit my lip. Thank you for reading me. I wish you continued success in your project, as you have done until today. Good night, community.